This is my audience. According to Micah Issett and Heather Newton in 2005, there were 220 executions in the U.S. between the years of 2007 and 2012. The death penalty, which is the sentencing of death to people suspected of certain crimes, has been going on for many, many years. The first forms of it were hanging or the electric chair. But nowadays, people are usually put to death by lethal injection, which is just basically a shot that will knock them out and then they will die. Most often, the people are put to death by the very worst crimes, such as treason, terrorism, murder, and drug trafficking. In other countries, there are different crimes that are you can also be put to death for. The death penalty is wrong, and there are a few benefits to society. So the first issue involved with capital punishment, which is another name for the death penalty, is the ethics. My opponents believe that the death penalty is a way of getting an eye for an eye. In a 2014 survey by Art Swift, 35% of the people that he surveyed support the death penalty just because of the eye for an eye theory. Now, these people believe that it's a way of giving the families of their victims justice or other things like that. Another thing that my opponents believe is that race isn't an issue when involving the death penalty. According to Micah Issett and Heather Newton in 2015, inequalities only exist because of regional demographics and social conditions. However, my view is that a main issue with this is that you could have it wrong. You could be sentencing someone to death that didn't actually commit this. According to the Innocence Project in 2015, 333 people were freed from death row by DNA research. DNA research is a fairly new thing that came out just recently, and it required all people that were put on death row to have DNA testing done to ensure that they were actually the suspect or involved in the crime. And my view on the racial issue is that juries really look at people's race to determine whether or not they should be put to death. As of 2002, 12 white people were executed for the murder or another thing where the victim was an African American, but 178 African Americans were put to death when a white person was the victim, according to the American Civil Liberties Union, which didn't have a date. So as you can see, people were much more likely to put an African American to death when the victim was white instead of a white person to death for a black victim. This is a really big issue that many people believe, and however, my opponents don't see this as being an issue. The next main issue with the death penalty is crime rates. My opponents believe that if there are less bad people alive, that there will be less crimes. According to Issett and Newton in 2015, executions went up and violent crimes went down over the past few years. So this is a trend that does show that if there are more executions, there will be less violent crimes. However, my view is that the crime rate doesn't have anything to do with the death penalty. According to Issett and Newton in 2015, murder rates in states without the death penalty were 18% lower than states that actually had the death penalty. So there really isn't that big of a difference, because these stats come from both sides, so I don't believe that the death penalty actually contributes to violent crimes, especially murder rates. The final issue that I'm going to discuss is the cost. People that are for the death penalty don't believe that it costs very much, but they don't know the true facts. They say that lethal injections, which again are the most common forms of putting someone to death, only cost $100, according to Kelly Irvin 2014. So really, doing the actual putting someone to death is actually pretty cheap considering you're killing someone. However, my view is that it actually costs a lot more than you would think. According to Irvin 2014, when you are actually doing the trial, it costs the prosecution and defense $470,000 more in cost just to do the trial when the death penalty is involved. According to Urban 2014, housing for inmates on death row is also 2 times greater than just a common inmate. And in California, according to Urban 2014, having all of the prisoners on death row costs $125.5 million more than housing the people on in normal jails. So, in conclusion, you learned about the ethics involved with the death penalty. The opponents believe that it's okay to do it because the families get closure and there are no racial issues. However, I believe that you could be wrong, and there are also multiple racial issues. When crime rates are involved, my opponents believe that less bad people are out there, there will be less crimes. But my view is that it doesn't make any big difference. And finally, cost. My opponents believe that the cost is very low because lethal injections are very low cost. However, my view is that the cost is actually huge holding people on death row versus just normal inmates. So in conclusion, the death penalty should be abolished, I believe, because of all these reasons. This is my audience.